Welcome to Kaiser Watch with John Kaiser. I'm your host, Jim Goddard.
John, what's coming up on today's show?
Well, I'm going to talk once more about the vulnerability of the global West to the reliance of raw material supply from the global East. And today we're going to focus a little bit on FPX Nickel and a bit more on Wolfden Resources and its Pickett project in Maine.
Why did FPX Nickel jump last week despite weak nickel prices and a deepening bear market for resource juniors?
Jim, I was quite surprised to see early February, after the company put out an announcement that the strategic partners had all coughed up additional money, about $4.3 million at 48 cents to maintain their respective stakes, that the stock actually went up, especially given that their core metal is nickel. And the nickel price is now down to about $7.13 a pound. The USGS just published its preliminary supply data for 2023. I've inputted all into my database, and you can see who produced what in 2023 and what the revisions were for 2022. In the case of nickel, Indonesia now supplies 50% of global nickel, and that's possibly going to rise even more. Canada and Russia are declining slightly. Philippines is also fairly strong, but it is not growing anymore. The big deal with Indonesia and Philippines was that in 2008, when the nickel price squeeze was happening, Tsingshan developed a new way of processing raw laterite ore to convert into nickel pig iron for their stainless steel industry. It doesn't make the greatest quality stainless steel, but for Chinese standards, it was good enough. And that took the pressure off the price of nickel, and Indonesia and Philippines came out of nowhere as major nickel producers of laterite ore. And this is not processed by HPAL as it is in New Caledonia and other places with laterite deposits. This is literally using blast furnaces to smelt this raw ore down into its components. And Indonesia didn't like this and imposed a moratorium around 2015 or so and said, you guys are going to have to build the infrastructure to smelt these laterite ores in Indonesia. And the Chinese squawked and all that because they had existing infrastructure in China that they wanted to utilize for that. But eventually they capitulated, poured a lot of money into building these smelters. That's all fired by coal electricity, dirty coal, but China couldn't care less about clean energy. It's all about being an independent nation, not dependent on importing raw materials to whatever extent it can, except with very, very friendly nations. And Indonesia, being in China's backyard, is a very friendly nation. And so now Indonesia, with these Chinese-run and financed smelters, is now supplying half of the world's nickel supply, and it is super dirty nickel. And FPX Nickel has three strategic investors. One is Outokumpu, which is a stainless steel maker that's supposed to be green stainless steel based in Finland and supplying global West markets that actually care about the inputs that go into the products. The other is a mystery strategic investor who now nobody really cares about anymore. Both of them are likely downstream operators. The big news in mid-January, was that Sumitomo came on board with a $14.4 million financing at 48 cents. That had a little bit of a blip, but it quickly faded as the market realized, well, now the company has $40 million in the treasury and can sit back and just work on its feasibility study through 2025. And the stock kind of faded away as everybody realized this was a waiting game. But in my January 17th Kaiser Watch episode, I said this is actually a very positive development because Outokumpu and the strategic investor, and even Panasonic and Toyota, who are looking at the nickel sulfate facility bolt-on, none of them care a rat's ass about whether Dakar makes any money. They want it to be break even, and they'll make their money because they have a secure supply of clean nickel for their downstream products, which is green stainless steel, and for batteries for electric vehicles, where they can argue these are clean inputs, not dirty nickel from Indonesia, made with coal and operated with subsidies on a break-even basis over there. This was going to be Canadian break-even stuff. So that's why shareholders of FPX Nickel have been in a funk, because they see that at the end of the day, this project will get developed and there will be this mercy-killing buyout. But Sumitomo is a mining company, and that means internal rate of return and net present value are meaningful concepts for developing Dakar as a mine, as a producer of ferronickel, most of which will go to the stainless steel market, which is still the majority of all consumption of nickel. So when the news came out that all of them, including Sumitomo, and this had to be a complicated calculation, because if the strategic investor and Outokumpu buy more, well, that increases the issue. That means Sumitomo has the right to increase. So this had to be this iterative calculation. They all figured out, okay, we're going to put in another extra $4.3 million for about 9 million shares, and that boosts working capital up to $45 million. So the question is legitimate. Nickel's in a deep funk. They expect oversupply to be the case for the rest of 2024. We see that Indonesia has an overwhelming supply advantage, and they don't seem to care about profit at all, because it's all about the downstream benefits and the general economy. Even though you have the S&P 500 making a new record, employment figures are really strong, interest rates are still high, resource stocks all over are languishing, and metal prices are going sideways or down in the case of nickel and in the case of lithium. Why on earth would FPX Nickel go up? And the only reason I can say is that maybe some of these strategic investors who are able to go higher to 15%, such as Sumitomo, maybe finally they are now going into the market and starting to buy stock in the open market. If Martin Turenne does another financing in the next year or so, well, I think there'll be a lynch mob heading for his doorstep, because the company doesn't need any more dilution. If these big guys want more of FPX Nickel, they can buy it in the open market. Retail isn't going to do it. Institutional is too stupid to understand that this is different from all these other low-grade sulfide nickel projects where it has to be transported and smelted. Here, the concentrate will be produced at the mine site and shipped direct to the stainless steel makers or to wherever the nickel sulfate facility is set up. So I'm becoming more and more bullish about FPX Nickel, even though I'm still annoyed that the Claxon Nation has declared Mount Sydney sacred after desecrating it with clear-cut logging. That's still in the background, but given the due diligence Sumitomo and everybody else has done, with eyes wide open about what this supposed threat to block this mine from being developed really represents, I'm starting to think that that particular First Nations problem is not going to be one that affects FPX Nickel's future. And there's the other groups, First Nation groups, that are independent from the Claxon Nation, who at this point continue to honor their benefits agreements and are in favor of seeing real jobs develop in their backyard.
Why did Wolfden Resources move up a couple of pennies after announcing that the Maine Land Use Planning Commission staff changed its position on the Pickett project rezoning application and appears set to reject the rezoning?
Well, Jim, that's just as with FPX Nickel. We're in this really crappy market, and out comes news that, in this case, it's actually not positive news at all. The stock actually blipped up a couple pennies after sinking down to the 6-cent level in December when word got out, and the company didn't actually announce this, but there was this big presentation hearing on December 13th where the Land Use Planning Commission staff did a presentation of their findings after they'd spent a couple of years studying the proposed Pickett Mountain mine, which is just a 1,200 ton per day underground mine. Originally, they wanted the the whole facility at the mine site, which is an unincorporated land, which happens to be 50% of all of Maine. The rest is township land. But the unincorporated land, it all comes under this Land Use Planning Commission. And when the Land Use Planning Commission initially rejected a mine in that area, Wolfden said, okay, well, we'll move the tailings facility and processing facility into one of the nearby townships where it's not in the middle of the remote forest, logged off forest area, but it's actually in their backyard. They're in favor. They want these jobs, and we'll build it there. It'll be completely professionally built a processing facility with all the water. In fact, it consumes more water than it releases. They keep having to add it. All water gets recycled into the system, and they're all in favor of it. And as soon as we have the rezoning permission, we will submit to a feasibility study to the Department of Environmental Protection, which is what was mandated after 7 years of changing their mining law in Maine to allow responsible mine development. This included prohibiting open pit mine, but underground mines are supposed to be allowed. And Wolfden was in there as a first mover, acquiring a project Getty had found many decades ago, but never did anything with because it was relatively small. And they've done a PEA. And the next step really was to get this rezoned so that they can then submit it to the Department of Environmental Protection and get a full-blown permit. And when they complain about this or that, their engineers can come up with a solution. At the end of the day, the DEP may say, no, you just don't meet our standards, and it's dead in the water. And so Wolfden thought they had it all figured out, but what they did not really count on was an NGO called the National Resources Council of Maine. And this is a lifestyle organization that employs a couple dozen people. They burn through about $2.8 million a year, and that's about as much. They get about $3 million in donation revenue, and they're based in Bangor. And their sole purpose is to raise money and pay themselves to pretend to do good for the state of Maine. One of the do-gooder things that they got involved with in 2019 was to help block the a corridor, which was to a 146-mile corridor that was to pass through Maine on its way to Massachusetts to deliver hydroelectric power from Canada, clean energy. That opposition to that was bankrolled by Next Era Energy, which happens to operate the Seabrook nuclear power plant in New Hampshire, and it apparently spent $20 million to get this ballot initiative on the ballot, and the voters actually turned it down the corridor. So this partly built thing is in limbo at the moment, and the nuclear power plant is busy spending money to make sure it can gouge everybody with clean energy from its nuclear power plant, which has a higher price. Because when you feed the Canadian electricity into the grid, it of course reduces the price. So they will end up losing money on their existing infrastructure. So the NRCM, of course, needs to have something visible to raise donations from, and it decided to focus on this small mine, 1,200 ton per day underground mine. It's just going to be a shaft with underground add. It's a barely tiny footprint within this 10 million acre private property. This is actually private property. It's not state land or anything. They decided to make this its poster child to help raise the money. They are going to block mining in Maine. And at that hearing, there was only 8 of the 9 commissioners in the commission because one had retired. The new one was pending. Tom Dubois was pending until early January, and the main chairperson, who has since retired as chairperson, was away, could not attend it. So this meeting was hijacked by the 4 people who are vociferously against mining. And if you go and review the recording, the video recording of it, you can see that these people are absolutely ignorant in terms of the kinds of questions. They say stuff like, well, you're a tiny little Canadian company. You don't have the $200 million in the bank to build this, and of course, you only have a PEA. That's an inferred resource. How can we rely on anything like this? And of course, it's all been professionally done. The company is real. It's not one of those crappy lifestyle Canadian juniors who only pretend to go through the motions. This is a real company that spent $10 million acquiring the project and another $10 million since 2017 doing drilling and engineering work, putting together the initial feasibility demonstration work, and wanting to do it proper because they went in there because they saw that Maine was now open for mining business. The new rules were clear, and you're not going to go in there to try and circumvent existing rules. But this lifestyle NGO made it its mission to trumpet through the Bangor Daily, which is the big newspaper in Bangor, which is where all the coastal elites live. They have maybe a cabin up in rural Maine, or what's been a new project or process is that retirees who don't really care about jobs or anything like that, they have been buying these houses that are cheap in rural Maine because the pulp and paper industry, which used to sustain Maine, it died 10, 15 years ago. And incidentally, this is another interesting thing. This project is actually to the east of Baxter State Park. And Baxter State Park is famous for Katahdin Mountain, which is the northern destination of the 2,200-mile Appalachian Trail that starts in northern Georgia. And I'd never really heard of this until I recently read Bill Bryson's 1998 book, A Walk in the Woods, which was made into a movie in 2015 starring Robert Redford and Nick Nolte as Bryson and his hiking partner Katz, which is a pseudonym for the person who it actually is. And this final stretch of Maine, hardly anybody completes it. Bryson himself and Katz, they started in the initial part in the south, and they only did a fraction of it before giving up on that hike. But Bryson then had the strategy of sampling different segments. And the last part of the book is where he and Katz show up in Munson, and there's another 100-mile wilderness trail that goes to Mount Katahdin, and they barely made a third of it, didn't even get to the Katahdin Ironworks before they ended up bailing, because this is a horrible part that's very difficult, lots of stream crossings, lots of up and down hills. Maine's topography is not spectacular rugged mountains. It's these rolling hills, but lots of lakes and waters in between. And they ended up giving up. And this Appalachian Trail business supposedly attracts 3 million visitors a year, somewhere along that 2,200 mile. But the Baxter State Park only issues 3,150 permits to hikers to go in there, and they can only hike from June to October because, of course, Maine is bogged down in snow and ice and misery the rest of the year. And even those first 2 months, you don't want to be there because that is black fly time. That's when it's a nightmare to be out in the woodlands of Maine hiking and being chewed to death by black flies. It's like Ontario and Quebec, which explorers work in there and they hate it, but they're looking for something, metals in the ground. So this NRCM hijacked the meeting, got the Bangor Daily to write up, it didn't go well for this company, even though in a December episode I should have showed all the slides that the staff had put together. Well, the bad news that Wolfden put out last week was that the staff itself has now changed its mind and decided that what it originally thought was going to be a yes for the rezoning application, they're now planning to make it a no. And there's a meeting happening on February 14th where they will possibly vote on rejecting the application. What happened in early January was the proposal from Franklin County, which had a vacant seat. Somehow this legislative body in early January rejected that proposal, him as a nominee, and the other one for Lee Smith, who was retiring from the Oxford County, and Oxford County had become fed up with this person's stance on things and wanted to have a person that more reflected the county's interests rather than that of the elites in Bangor and elsewhere. And this legislature rejected those. Now, Tom Dubois has been reinstated, but they've argued that, well, he can't vote on this. So on February 14th, there will be a meeting where only 7 commissioners and possibly the 8th who is anti-mining. 4 of them are anti-mining, and you need 5 to get this approved. So it's almost a cinch that if it's done as the way it is, this rezoning application will be rejected. But on January 19th, Wolfden did file a proposal to have this whole thing extended until all the commissioners are in place, and then have that presentation that was done December 13th redone, so it can't be hijacked by all these people remotely, texting to the commissioners what to say and ask about this, and this will be. If they get this approved, there is a chance still that everybody will be on board. Now, what's the townships were absolutely livid when they heard that this is how it has gone on. And recently, the New York Times, which of course is kind of a democratic newspaper, they had a full-page article talking about the misery of young people in rural Maine because there is no infrastructure to deal with the nothingness of their lives, which descends into delinquency and substance abuse and all these wonderful opioids that this nasty piece of garbage called the Sackler family pushed into the system and polluted America's lives with. Nothing's being done over there, and yet you have this little lifestyle NGO blocking what is a relatively benign operation with a tiny footprint just so that they can raise money and have 30 or so people employed being absolutely righteous about what they are doing, true beliefs, don't care about anything else. Everybody else is roadkill. They don't care. They are in the bottom part of the left part of the belief horseshoe, right along with groups like Mining Watch Canada, which also don't really give a damn about the big picture. It's all just lifestyle NGOs maximizing their own personal interest and then feeling righteous about it in the whole process. I call these PutinXi Poodles because in this blocking of resource development, they're actually supporting the agenda of the global East, which pollutes everything downstream, hurts people, doesn't give a rat's ass about what happens to the downstream victims because those are autocracies where nobody has any say. Everything is, all suffering is for the collective good, which in the case of Russia is the oligarchs, and in the case of China is the Beijing Communist Party. And so, with all this happening, you kind of, why would Wolfden pop up? Well, for one, in that news release that they put out, they actually became a little bit more open. The company has been very timid and polite in its dealings with everybody, while the NRCM has been quite brutal and blunt with its machinations, manipulating these commissioners who are just volunteers and have no true expertise in making these decisions. In fact, their biggest complaint is that they don't understand enough of this. Well, it's not their job to understand that. That is the Department of Environmental Protection's job, where they have professionals employed to look at the proposals that Wolfden's engineers have put forward for the Pickett project. So the market kind of perked up that now that the company is in danger of having $20 million flushed down the toilet because of this lifestyle intervention, maybe they'll get on to a different project. The group it's strong enough, has big supporters, big shareholders. Maybe they'll find a new project. And another thing is they do have the nickel projects in Manitoba, and one of them, Nickel Island, they would like to drill in 2025 winter through the ice for the potential extension of the existing deposit which isn't quite big enough to justify development. So maybe they'll focus on that rather than Pickett Mountain. But of course, nothing ever goes right in this resource junior sector. We've had a warm winter in Canada, at least in the eastern Canada, and the poor First Nation groups that are in that area. Wolfden, of course, is consulting with them, and one of the chiefs needs to make a sign off and say, yeah, it's okay for you to do a geophysics ground survey on the ice while the ice is still intact. The ice will not be intact after the early April. So they have basically 6 weeks to get this job done, which will take about 6 weeks. So the company's now waiting on the phone for the main chief that they're dealing with to get together with the other chiefs in the area and get them all on board that, yeah, we don't care if Wolfden does a survey on the ice. Maybe we'll care when they want to do a drill program a year from now, but we don't really care about this. But they are freaking out because the winter ice road that's supposed to open from the north of Lake Winnipeg may not open this year at all. And this winter ice road goes way up north and is the way they bring in all their equipment and needs for the whole summer activity. So they're kind of distracted by this problem in their own backyard that has nothing to do with Wolfden. And then, of course, the question rises, well, why isn't there an all-weather road into this northern part of Manitoba? Why do we need to rely on these dangerous winter ice roads, which was actually featured in a Liam Neeson movie not too long ago, with, of course, treachery by mining companies. You always got to package the mining companies as evil, treacherous entities. But in any case, the stock probably perked up because worst case scenario, the company shuts down Pickett for a couple years. If it does get shut down for the reasons just described, everybody will look at it and say, this is crazy that this Land Use Planning Commission controlling half of Maine, whose owners are free to clear-cut log it at will, they can just say, no, we're not going to allow a simple rezoning. Why not just make it a rezoning that's conditional on passing the Department of Environmental Permitting to approve this? If they don't approve it, the rezoning is moot. It's dead. And we'll probably see a government change in a couple of years in Maine, and we're going to see all these pissed off rural counties. They're going to say, okay, enough of this. We still want everything done properly, but we don't want a bunch of lifestyle elites from Bangor telling us all these lies. Because when you do a Google Earth shot of that area, it is not a nice area. It's all been clear-cut logged. There's nothing special. Yes, Baxter State Park to the west is beautiful, but that's even a different watershed. It doesn't even flow into this area. This area certainly doesn't flow into this Baxter State Park area. And there are certainly no salmon in this area. And the Native Americans that they have been consulting on this, they don't seem to be particularly interested in this area because they're more concerned about getting a license to operate and to develop and operate a casino in Maine for all these elites that are flocking to Maine with nothing to do while they sit there in their retirement cottages while all the workers around there have no real jobs other than, say, cleaning the toilets of these retirees who have been there like a few years or so, and all they do is like drive an hour to town, 100 miles or so, a couple hours, go to town in their SUVs, load up with whatever they need and go back, and can completely ignore all the people who naturally live in rural Maine. And it's, especially this eastern part, it's not a special place. It's similar to New Brunswick. I've been to the Sisson project in New Brunswick, a Molly tungsten project that's also being held up by anti-mining people just for the sake of doing so. And it isn't exactly pretty country. There are parts that are pretty, but this part is not pretty. It's not special. It's logging country. It's second growth forest that'll be cut down again because this is 10 million acres is privately owned land over which the public really has no rights other than what the property owners grant them.
John, thank you so much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Kaiser Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as a recommendation to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at kaiserresearch.com.